Good afternoon. Good to see you back, Nick. Right. Today's passage is coming from Philippians. Last week, one of our congregation members asked me this question. Pastor Yale, what expectation did you have for Yuli and Ijun? I didn't have an answer right away, and I had to think a bit because it was a while ago. And I remember thinking that when Yuli was 1 or 2 years old, I wanted her to be a tomboy, not too girly and boyish and strong. And as you all know, it turned out to be even more than I prayed. And what did I expect for my son, Ijun? I wanted him to grow up healthy, confident, and able to articulate what he wants. And that person asked another question. What are your expectations of the church members then? That was more difficult question. It is hard because you are not my son and daughters. And I also had a difficulty answering because everyone's situations are very different. But I answered, my hope is everyone to grow in God, to mature and become shepherds serving others. That was my answer, and I thought that was a great answer. We all have certain expectations for our children or for people around us. And that expectation is about their maturity. As they grow older, as their time with God gets longer, we want them to grow and be mature. Whether they are children or members of church, we expect them to grow up in 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We don't want them to remain the same. Now, think of the question. My answer have sounded better if I said, I want them to be Christ-like. That sounds more like pastor's answer than simply saying, I want them to be shepherds. Of course, I don't mean to imply that Christ-like is the only correct answer. But it is also true that I felt Christ-likeness feels a bit overwhelming. I have this in mind. Being Christ-like is someone special can only pursue, not the regular person like I am. I know my children's limitations, and it was a little hesitant to say that I want them to be like Christ. We all have this misunderstanding about the Christ-likeness. We think that being like Christ is something that only perfect people can pursue. Something that only holy and special people can do. Something that has nothing to do with the rest of us. Or you may think you're just starting to believe in Jesus, so you don't know much about the faith. So being like Christ is still a long way for you. We may think that it is impossible to be like Christ at all, given our personalities and bad habits. For a variety of reasons, we may think of this maturity of Christ-likeness as a distant dream, future dream, or as something we should not pursue just yet. But the Bible is very clear in its command for us to be Christ-like. In the Old Testament, God said, "Be holy, for I am holy." Today's passage, Apostle Paul says, have the same mindset of Jesus Christ. Whereas we have this misunderstanding that being Christ-like is a future plan, but the Bible says now is a time to follow the command. Then we should follow this clear biblical command of becoming more like Christ today. The Bible doesn't tell us to be like Christ after completing Living Life Bible study. It doesn't tell us to be like Christ after 10 years of faith. It doesn't tell us become like Christ after becoming deacons or elders. It doesn't tell us to be like Christ after we have rid off all our bad languages and we have solved all the problems of impatience and our laziness. The command of maturing into Christ-like is a command given to us right now, immediately. So this Bible study that we're doing, Experiencing God, teaches us God's command is about now. It doesn't tell us to follow Christ next year. It tells us to follow Christ today. We have to obey right now. Then we want to know, what does it mean to be like Christ? Does it mean that we should wandering from place to place like Jesus did? Or never marry? Or physically dying on the cross like Jesus did? We know the answer is not. Because Christ-likeness can be practiced in all the different aspects of our lives. Even the 12 apostles, think about them. They followed Jesus the closest, but they didn't die the same way Jesus did. They each had their own unique missions, and they died obeying God and following Christ in their own way. The same is true for us. We are to be Christ-like in the place where God has put us. And that place is so varied that one size doesn't fit all. But thankfully, in today's passage, we can find an example of being mature and being like Christ, modeled by Jesus Christ. So Jesus showed these great principles that we can apply into our lives. We should apply these principles in our lives. And what we find in the passage is, first, giving up his rights. Jesus gave up his rights. And second, he humbled himself. And third, he made a concrete sacrifice. Three things we find in the passage. He gave up his right, he humbled himself, and he made a concrete sacrifice. First, Jesus Christ gave up his right. Verse 6 says, he did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Jesus did not consider equality with God something to be his. A right is something we deserve. If you say you have right, it means that you deserve to have that. And think about Jesus. Because Jesus is one with God, his rights are the same as God's right. He had the right to receive all our praise, to sit on the throne of power, to rule over the universe, and to judge between good and evil. This is Jesus' right, as same with God. But he gave up their right. To say that he did not consider equality with God is to say that he gave up their right. He gave up. Instead of sitting and judging, he came to be judged. He gave it up voluntarily. That was his first decision. Gave up his right. And then our life must be the same with Jesus, giving up our rights. And this first decision, giving up his right, leads to his second decision, humbling himself to become lowly. Humbling himself and become lowly. Of course, giving up his right could be the same as becoming lowly. But if you can separate it, there's a difference. Jesus came down to earth and become like us. This is his choice to become lowly. While giving up his right itself implies becoming lowly goes one step further than giving up right. There are times when we give up our rights, what we deserve. But more often than not, we brag about the rights we have given up, secretly hoping for others to acknowledge. Let's say there is someone who deserves to be treated well, who deserves to sit on a high seat, but gives up his right. However, even then, we may secretly expect people to notice our praiseworthy, humbling deed, want to be praised for it, and feel proud and self-righteous about ourselves for doing so. I don't know about you, but it is true for me. However, what Jesus did was going one step further from renunciation is right, but he came directly to the lowly place. If renunciation of his right is not receiving what he is due, then humbling is sacrificing what he already possessed. Jesus chose to become part of the creation. the creation He made, to come within the constraints of created time and space. We, as parents, all the parents, we sometimes experience this going to a lowly place. When our kids make ridiculous demands, when they're being unreasonable, of course we may say no firmly, but at the same time, we try to explain in a way they can understand. We use their words, we use logic they can understand, and we use examples that are on their level. This is an example of us going low. There's another case when we go low like that. It is in a relationship with a loved one. When you are dating, he or she may misunderstand you and just argue and claim her own ideas only. And there are times when you get angry and stop the conversation, but you hold back and try to get down to their level and explain things in a language they can understand. Sometimes it's frustrating when you fight and you want to get angry, but you try to be patient and explain until they understand. So all this relationship, husband and wife, parent-child, and boyfriend and girlfriend relationship have one thing in common. They are all in loving relationship. So in a loving relationship, we choose to be lower. Not that we were hierarchically superior, but that we're willing to take the burden to come to their place. So we go low when we are in love. In this relationship, how deeply and how far and how long you go is a measure of your love. If you go deeper, it means that your love is more. If you go farther, it means that your love is bigger. If you go longer, then it means your love is greater. And Jesus did that thing for us. He did not take equality with God something to his, but he became like one of us. Notice the enormity of his depths and length. The depths between God and us. Eternal difference between him and us. But he came down to us. That is the depth of his love. And the length is love. Throughout the entire history of humanity, from Adam and Eve to now. That's how long he had endured for us. That represents his love. So he became low. He became humble for us. That is his maturity. So remember that we're talking about Jesus as Christ's maturity, and we want to resemble that. He gave up his rights, and he became low and be humble. Those are the maturity that we want to pursue. And third thing, Jesus showed that love in the form of concrete sacrifice. Jesus showed that love in the form of concrete sacrifice. Jesus was not just a wise teacher who lived on earth, taught good things, and died. There are many good books, many teachers and leaders in the world. They certainly have good teachings and insights. You may listen. You may listen to their message. But we need one more thing to dedicate our lives to them. We don't just dedicate our lives to Socrates and Plato. We don't give our lives to a message that doesn't have a concrete sacrifice, a concrete commitment. Jesus' crucifixion gave us that concrete example of love. The sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, of course, it is a payment for our sin, but it is also a symbol of greatest love that he showed. So he not only told us that he loves us, but he showed concrete example of his love. Think about it. Without Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, would you be willing to give your lives to his message? Would you follow him with your life if he did not die? He did not give you the concrete example of love. Would you follow the leaders who just say things and not sacrificing their lives? We all commit our lives and dedicate our lives to the message that comes with concrete form of the sacrifice. Then, if this sacrifice is not present in our love and service, something is wrong with our love and service too. When you give a word of exhortation, when you give a word of challenge to other people, and they listen, of course, but their lives are not changed, then the first thing we must examine is whether there is sacrifice that go with your words. The same applies to me too. If I preach, if I give you the message, but over and over I don't see people changing, then first thing I must examine is whether there is a sacrifice, concrete form of sacrifice that went out with my own words. We should ask, am I taking up my cross? Am I showing a concrete example of sacrifice? Am I communicating the message of love with my life? Not only me, we all have someone we want to evangelize and pray for their life to mature. Then we must know there must be a sacrifice in your life to follow Jesus in order for that to happen. You must have this concrete example of sacrifice in your life for the maturing to be happen. Without it, we cannot hope to see other people's mature or expect their lives to change. It takes a lot of determination for a person to change the direction of their life, even slightly. Next year is our 10th anniversary, and I'm realizing over and over how hard it is to change even the smallest habit of each other. You can't change your spouse's habit. It is a big deal to change a person's life in a small way, even in a small way. How much then harder is it to let go of your old habit and commit to God and be mature and be like Christ? It is almost impossible to change the course of the person's life. But thankfully, that amazing thing happened to us first. You all changed the direction of your former lives and followed Christ. You all decided to turn away from the evil habits and live a life more like Christ. You all decided to live differently from the world. And we know how was this remarkable change possible. It wasn't because of your will. It wasn't because of your nature. It wasn't because of your parents. And it wasn't because of your education. And we know that it was because of the love of the cross. It was because of the concrete act of love and sacrifice that Jesus showed us. You may change your life by reading self-help books, but you don't commit, you don't dedicate your life to that. It is only through the concrete example of Jesus Christ that we change our lives. Then if I go back to the person who asked me the question, what expectation do you have for the members and your children? If I were to answer once again, it would be my expectation of the members is that we all attain Christ-like maturity. Give up their rights, be humble, and show concrete example of sacrifice. And as a pastor, I would be delighted if I see Christ-like maturity in your life, in your behavior, in the look on your face, in the decisions you make in your life. Because God told us to have this mindset of Christ. And as a follower of Christ, we have this responsibility to be like Christ, to do what Christ did for us. No matter what you do and who you marry, what kind of family you have, where you live, or how you grow old, it may look different. But if I find a little bit of Christ-like in you, maturity in you, those three things, renunciation, humility, and sacrifice, then I'll be glad and thankful that God will answer my expectation for the members. So we all want to see that in our lives and in our ministry. In 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years. And you'll be surprised how much you have changed it after 1 year passed to live like that. After pursuing your Christ-like maturity 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years, you'll be surprised how much you have grown. So being Christ-like maturity is not something that only special and holy people can attain. It is a commandment for every one of us. Then also it is a commandment that we must pursue right now. It's not something that you can only pursue after completing experiencing God. It is something that you can practice today. Where you are, whether you're being shepherd or member, whether you teach or you're being taught, or you serve or you're in fellowship, and anywhere, God commands us to have this mindset of Christ. Let's lay down our rights. Let's be humble and go to low places. And let's make concrete sacrifices. And we know that without it, there's no change, no visible transformation is possible. If we want to evangelize, if we want people to change their lives, then all we have to do is to follow Christ and be a great example of sacrifice. In the house church, let us lay down our rights and serve at the level of others. In big church, let us find a place of sacrifice and put our love into concrete action. And in your relationship, have this mindset of Jesus Christ. And God will work through you and change people's lives and transform their lives and make them mature through you. And that is the maturity that we want to pursue, Christ-like maturity. Let us pray.